Hello, I'm Martin Hutchins. Welcome to another PAS Fireside Chat. These are informal but informative sessions with members and officers. We've had one chat already with councillors talking about preparing for setting up virtual planning committees. We have had a second session with plan-making officers, planning policy officers, talking about the implications of COVID-19 for councils that are in the middle of reviewing or producing their local plans. And today I'm glad to be talking to a member and an officer, and we're going to be talking about protocols for running a smooth planning committee. And I'm joined by Peter Ford and Bill Stevens from Plymouth Council. So Peter, could you just quickly introduce yourself, tell us what you do?
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin. I'm Peter Ford. I'm the Head of Development Management at Plymouth City Council.
And Bill?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Bill Stevens. I chair Plymouth City Council's Planning Committee. First chaired it in 2012 and have been a member of the committee since 2004.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Peter, could I just start with you? Would you mind just giving us a very quick overview of where Plymouth's planning service is in terms of, what's been happening with COVID-19 and preparations for putting on planning committee?
Yes, we've been trying to operate as normal service as we possibly can while the COVID-19 has been going forward. We haven't had a planning committee yet. We have had a lot of discussions about how we can run a virtual planning committee, and we're trying to find a way of doing it through the MS Teams software system. We are planning to do some rehearsals, some test runs with officers and members to see how it can operate. And our first scheduled planning committee isn't until the 18th of June. So we've got quite a lot of time to prepare for that. In the meantime, we've been operating a pretty much full planning service, development management service, issuing decisions, but we have had issues with neighbour notifications, and so we have asked all applicants to sign an extension of time so that we can have a bit more time to assess applications than we normally would.
So the extension of time has become a normal part of the process, if you like.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we've as soon as an application is validated, we ask the applicant to sign an extension time, which we're saying is the end of August. Not that necessarily it's going to take us until the end of August to determine the application, but to give everybody the right expectation. One, as a planning authority, that we're not going to be able to deal with it as quickly as we normally would, particularly with regard to notifications and site visits, and also an expectation for the applicant, which so far has been very positively received.
Okay. And Bill, what does a chair of planning do while there's no planning committee?
Very, very good question. We've got a lot of time to look after our constituents, which we would normally do anyway. But in many ways, very little has changed in terms of time. As Peter said, we're still running to the original timetable that the council agreed for committee meetings, and that includes us on the planning committee. May would normally, for most councils anyway, be annual meeting time, so choosing leaders, cabinet members, committee chairs, committee members, etc., Lord Mayor in our case as well. So we would always be planning to meet on the 18th of June anyway. So it's lucky that we've got this gap now to get everything in place for our first virtual meeting. It's so important that we get this right because we are a public-facing committee, in many ways the most public-facing committee of our council. Everybody's interested by definition in the decisions that we're about to take, whichever side they're looking at it from. So we've got to make sure that we do what we normally do, which is get the business transacted efficiently and correctly, and maintain our openness and transparency to the public. And if we can keep those two plates spinning in the air, it'll be a success.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. I mean, most councils are looking at the moment at the actual practicalities of setting up a planning committee. So, when are we going to do it? What technology platform are we going to use? all those sorts of things. What I wanted to talk to you guys about specifically is, once you've set it all up and it's actually operating, whether you've had some thoughts around how the process would actually work, and your role, particularly Bill, in terms of, you just said, transparency and keeping the thing moving, and then, got plates to spin, inviting people in to speak. Whether you've had conversations or started looking at perhaps sort of protocols around how it might actually operate.
Yeah, we've been doing that since the beginning, and Peter and the staff have been very, very helpful in supporting us in that. It's one of the key elements, excuse me, of a successful planning committee, maintaining the trust both of local people who may object to planning applications and developers and applicants who obviously want to see their schemes be given approval and succeed. So we need to maintain that trust that we would normally have if we were meeting in a committee room or a council chamber, as we do. That's made all the more difficult by us literally not being in the same room as each other. There are such obvious things that you would see if we were meeting in a normal council committee room. We have designated seating areas, so people with an interest, a large I interest, in seeing a scheme be approved or rejected wouldn't be allowed to interact with committee members normally, or officers willy-nilly. So we need to make sure we have that trust extended to our virtual meetings as well. We're looking at having some form of disclaimer or contract drawn up by our council legal officers, whereby those of us sitting in offices at home or our back dining rooms or whatever would give a solemn undertaking that we're not going to have anyone in the room with us who we shouldn't, we're not going to have any disruptions, and we're not going to have any information in front of us that we shouldn't, only the officer presentations. Maintaining that trust is absolutely key.
So you're taking the view that you proactively promote that trust, if you like.
Absolutely. I think that's essential to running a good planning committee anyway. Those who've been around planning committees will know that you can't please everybody, and if we agree to something that's controversial, it's because we're in the developer's pocket and we're taking brown envelopes. If we reject something that's controversial in the developer's eyes, it's because we pander to NIMBYs. So you can't win either way. We need to make sure that everything is as legally watertight as possible, and we maintain our record of maintaining the trust of local people and local developers and investors. It's bread and butter as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Bill. I'll come back to you in a moment just about how you see your own particular role, live running that planning. I just wanted to ask Peter, from the officer's side, in terms of running up to a committee and thinking about officer presentations and how that's going to work. Have you had some thoughts around that?
I think the key thing here is to ensure we thoroughly prepare and practice before we actually have the committee. I've briefed officers already about how it's likely to work, and what I would like the case officers as normal to be able to give the presentations, and what we intend to do before we go anywhere near the live planning committee is to do a series of rehearsals so that we can actually get the process right, because a lot of officers do feel quite nervous at planning committee when it's in the council chamber. If they're on their own in their own houses, I'm sure they'll probably feel even more nervous when they know it's being live streamed. So it's really important that we get that right, and probably we need to just think about how they present it, because there's a lot of sort of facial expressions, pointing at things, etc., which will go on in the council chamber, which of course you can't do when you're doing it on remotely. So we'll practice all that, and as I say, because we have the luxury of a bit more time than some councils to prepare for this, we'll practice again, make sure officers are confident in what they're doing, and make sure that members then can get all the information they need to make their decisions.
Okay, so can I ask as well, is there anything in your sort of official, let's say your constitution or your current protocols, that you're thinking about having to change? So for example, if your constitution currently says that your committee is going to have a certain number of members on it, are you changing any of that? Are you having to look at the constitution in terms of a virtual planning committee in any way? Are you going to reduce the numbers of members, or are you going to go with current?
I don't think there's any need for a look at the number of councillors when we meet remotely. I think if we were still in a sort of half lockdown, if you like, and we were still looking to meet in the same room, then we might need to look at having fewer people present for social distancing purposes. But I think if we can all survive logging in and getting to the virtual meeting table, we should be okay. Peter's absolutely right in terms of making sure that our officers feel as comfortable as we can make them and as confident as we can allow them to be, because a planning committee decision is only as good as the information that an officer or series of officers give us. Right from day one, in terms of chairing the planning committee, I've wanted to build that trust between councillors and planning officers, to break down the barriers and make sure we can all understand each other's roles at planning committee meetings, and hopefully build trust in one another. So with that in mind, I really do want to give officers a sense of security and confidence. In terms of actually changing the rules, we're going to have a look at new rules of debate quite clearly. People can't just put their hand up or come in on a point of order. So we're going to have to look at temporary rules of debate. The big issue I can foresee is with site visits. We're quite successful in Plymouth's planning committee with not deferring issues for site visits. We always plan in advance. The controversial ones where a visit to the location is going to be useful. Clearly we can't do that with the current situation, have a group of councillors, officers, and maybe a landowner or developer meet and have a chat looking around a field or in front of a building site or whatever. So I think we're going to have to look at suspending those for the duration. What I don't want to see troublemakers looking to defer issues for a site visit, knowing that we can't have site visits to go on. I'm in touch with our political opposition. The shadow chair and I have had quite a good conversation to make sure we keep things ticking over and make the logistics run. So it looks like we should be able to do that. But it's that sort of issue that we need to tackle and get over with the presentation, the preparation that Peter was talking about. What I don't want to do is to get to the first meeting and somebody think, oh, if only we'd thought of that. We should have addressed that. I want us to concentrate on planning issues, not logistical ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just going to add. I mean, we do have quite a detailed protocol in Plymouth, which is helpful. But of course, when we wrote the protocol, which obviously Bill and myself were very much involved in, we hadn't foreseen the COVID-19 issues. But for example, the site visits, we don't have the site visits actually as part of the planning committee. They are just for members' information to familiarise themselves with the site. So one of the things we're thinking about is making sure that we have sufficient visual information, and obviously then the limitations for officers to go out on site and actually take photographs is restricted. So the use of Google Earth, for example, is really, really important, and the fact that you can get 3D images and to be able to walk through a site using Google Earth, it's not as good as being on site, obviously, but we will be using that technology the best we can. And again, it's at practicing it and seeing how much you can actually see without actually going on a site visit. But Billy's right. I mean, it is quite important often for members to see a site, and so we're going to have to think very carefully how we can make sure that they can make proper decisions and informed decisions without having the benefit of a site visit, which will be. And
it's going to put the onus very much, as it always should, on committee members to make sure they read the papers well in advance. So if there is something that merits a particular a visual or a particular photograph from a particular angle, then going to have to spot that well in advance, having read the papers, so that we can, if possible, instruct officers to go out, take that snap, take that video, and have it ready at the committee. I suppose, speculating, the one option that would do that best is almost to have one officer live on site, if you like. Whether this is possible or not, I really don't know, and Peter's jaw might hit the floor at this point. But if we could have maybe someone live at the scene, so if someone wants to have a look from a particular angle or a particular viewpoint, we can instruct the officer to take a particular snap from whatever angle the councillor is requesting and feels would be useful. Older people watching this would remember Bernie the Bolt from The Golden Shot. So whether we get into a sort of left a bit, up a bit, no, right a bit, down a bit, I'm not sure. But we're going to have new ways of thinking in so many areas of planning committee meetings. And I think what's important is that any innovations that we do make, we don't get rid of unnecessarily afterwards. There'll be such temptation to throw the baby out with the bathwater once the lockdown ends and we go back to business as it was. It might be that this throws up new ways of working that we can hang on to and would be useful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Are you, as a council, are you envisaging that you'll have the same agendas that you normally have? You know, some councils have changed their scheme of delegation to keep certain types of decisions off of committee during this period to sort of lighten the load while they're working things out. Do you see your agendas changing at all, or will you have business as normal? Will planning committee cover the normal things?
Yeah, so we are quite lucky in Plymouth that we do have quite a high scheme of delegation anyway. It's at something like 98% delegation. So our agendas tend to be of no more than 3 or 4 items, and that enables, talking through with Bill, the planning committee want to deal with controversial and contentious applications that need member involvement, and they're comfortable to let officers deal with all the others. So because we have short agendas, I don't personally think that's going to be a major issue. Obviously, if the agendas were 10, 12 items long, I think I would be asking Bill whether he would consider an extended scheme of delegation. But I think as it stands, I don't have too many worries about that.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we do okay. I certainly don't have councillors beating a path to my door saying it's far too difficult to get controversial items onto the agenda. So there's no issue from that regard. The other side of the coin is that I don't have officers phoning me up all the time saying we've got too much going to the planning committee and it's becoming cumbersome. So hopefully, as Peter says, we've got a nice balance. The proof of the pudding, I think, will be in the eating. These sorts of virtual meetings are, by their very nature, a lot slower than a normal cut and thrust of debate and questioning. So whether or not we take longer on an item purely because of the virtual meeting, I don't know. That's something we're going to have to review very, very quickly. But the onus will be on all councillors to step up to the plate and make sure we can still transact the business necessary over the internet that we're going to have to.
Yeah, I know, Bill, from working with you on projects with other councils when we've had the occasion. I know that you like to run a professional planning committee. I just wonder, from that aspect, how you feel about keeping that professionalism and keeping things on track. Have you got some views on that?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential that we have that at the forefront of our mind. So you're right to raise it as a question. I'm sure over the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks, we've all seen the videos of, I don't know whether it's politicians or NHS people being interviewed at home, and the dog walks in, or somebody walks in behind, or the kiddies start making noise, and it's all very jolly. I really do want to try and avoid that, because we're dealing with serious issues that have very serious implications both for investors and local people. So I want to keep it as professional as possible. Whether or not we go down the ultimate route, of insisting that people, unlike the 3 of us meeting today, wear shirt and ties if we're men, or the smart suits we would expect from our female colleagues, I don't know, but that's something to consider. I want everybody watching these meetings to be as respectful of our proceedings and our decision making as they would if we were meeting in our chamber or our committee room. So I want it to be as serious, but also as relaxed as we would normally have it. So there's all sorts of things to consider, and remember that we are a public meeting. We're meeting so the public, both, as I say, investors and local people, can see our decision making and have confidence in it, that it's robust. If we don't treat that with the professionalism it deserves, and I think we're on hiding to nothing.
Is that the same from the officers' side, Pete? I mean,
absolutely. I mean, it is the shop window, if you like, of the planning department, and so it's that making sure that we give that same professional service that we would if it was in the council chamber, and rightly or wrongly, the technical hitches, or say, as Bill says, a child running in the background or whatever, regardless of how professional the officers would be, that would not give the right impression for Plymouth City Council. So we do need to make sure that those fairly obvious, if you like, protocols are maintained.
As well as being the shop window for our decision making, it's also the workplace for our staff, and I would want our staff to feel as comfortable and respected in a virtual meeting as they would in a planning committee meeting for real, or indeed one of our private meetings where we have briefings. Officers must have the respect that their independence and professionalism deserves from politicians.
And having things like Bill is an interesting point about attire. I was thinking, we're casually dressed today, but at the planning committee, I would want to wear a shirt and tie and a jacket, even if I'm sitting in my own house, because it is, it does pull over that professionalism.
I'm looking to have it as closely resembling a meeting in person as we possibly can. So little things like that do go an awful long way.
Yeah. I mean, there are other things. You mentioned earlier, Bill, about the theatre, I think, or the cut and thrust of the planning committee. And there are a lot of visual cues, like voting, putting a hand up. There are things, there are nameplates with people's names and roles. Have you thought about how you're going to make sure that everyone listening knows who's talking and who they are? You might have to, do that more deliberately than you might otherwise.
Yeah, I'm going to be reliant on the technical people for a lot of this. At the moment, I can see each of our names, so anybody looking at this can see Bill Stevens, Martin Hutchings, and Peter Ford. At the beginning, of course, you had, and very politely, as you always are, introduced us with our roles. That's going to be essential, that if I'm speaking, people know I'm the chair of the committee. If the head of development management is speaking, there's also the thing about people waving pens right in front of the camera, as you just did, that puts people off. So there's also, if if I want to take a swig from a cup of tea, making sure I don't put the mug right down in front of the camera. Little things that can appear silly, but can have a big effect on people watching and wanting a decision to go one way or the other. Voting, it could go either way, really. If we've got the means for electronic voting, that's fine. It might be that we just have to revert to a quick roll call and people saying for, against, or abstain, and me just reading out the register. I don't think that's going to be, excuse me, overly clunky. It does give the decision straight away, and it'll all be on the record anyway. So yeah, it's going to be a new way of working for all of us, particularly those of us, as you were saying, like the theatre and the show part of it. That's going to disappear very, very rapidly. It will be a lot slower in terms of me making a contribution, stopping, allowing the next person to come in, and so forth. We've got to make sure that people are aware of what's going to replace putting your hand up. We can't have a free-for-all. It is still going to have to be chaired, and the normal respect that we expect councillors to give officers and officers to give to councillors is still going to have to be there. But it's going to be a lot slower, a lot more relaxed, so people have got to be ready for that very sudden change of pace.
Yeah. How confident are you both in terms of the technology and using, the presentations and switching between screens and using messaging and, some of these chat facilities that, you mentioned earlier, Bill, about, the little side conversations. They're going to have to be all done online now, if at all. So I suppose in your preparations, you'll have time to test that sort of thing out.
Yeah. I mean, let's just say it's very interesting because of the use of MS Teams. Just before the lockdown, we had a presentation. It was literally a week before, and we were told over the next 6 months we're going to be rolling out MS Teams, and we're all told this is a new technology and it's all very exciting. Next week the lockdown came and we introduced MS Teams within a day. And it was all a bit slightly chaotic for the first couple of days, but within the last 3-4 weeks, we've actually become very efficient as officers at using MS Teams, and we have meetings now where we discuss planning applications, and an officer will then bring up a plan, use a cursor to point to it. So I think by the time we get to the planning committee, we will have thoroughly practiced using that technology, still obviously practicing doing it for the planning committee. But my biggest concern, which I'll be asking our IT people about, is people's individual broadband, because as we all know, if you're using your own personal broadband and your child next door is on there, streaming a video or something, it can easily break down. And if you're in a live planning committee and all of a sudden, members ask an officer a question and then the officer disappears, or the screen or sound goes, that's going to be very difficult with the openness and transparency issue of trying to deal with that. And also when you've got that, you're in your own homes, who is going to be fixing that in the live planning committee? We've talked about having somebody from a technical background being there to virtually there to help with the committee. But when you're dealing with individuals' own homes and their own broadband connections, that is something which I'm sort of concerned about. And when you've got, you know, all the planning committee plus the officers plus probably members of the public who want to speak. Again, we don't know how efficient, competent they will be with the technology, and we'll have applicants and etc. There's a lot of potential things that can go wrong, and just one of those going wrong could actually seriously disrupt a planning committee. So the public issue is probably the one which we have least control over, and we're asking a member of the public to speak who may have never used that technology before in their lives, and maybe have just downloaded the app a few minutes before.
Yeah, how are you proposing to prepare the public to take part?
Well, it's a good point. Well, I think what we're going to have to do is the public get we ask the public to register to speak in advance of the committee, and the democratic support they advise the democratic support officer, and I think that it will be down to primarily the democratic support officer explaining to the member public what is involved and giving them chance to test that out before committee. And you know, and Bill and myself with others have discussed, for example, allowing speakers to pre-record something and to just have it played at the committee if they don't feel comfortable doing it live, having some audio if they don't want to be seen in person.
The important thing to bear in mind, this is new for all of us, and even the most sort of techno-savvy councillor or officer won't have had a virtual planning committee to go to before, so everybody is in at the deep end. From my perspective, it's important that we get political buy-in from across the parties. If we can have all parties who are represented on the planning committee speaking with one voice, wanting it to work, it's so much easier for everybody to make it a success. The interesting thing for me will be the public involvement, and how we do the public speaking. I'm extremely reluctant, if at all possible, to have pre-recorded pieces and contributions. I like the live dynamic of somebody responding to what an officer has said. Our agenda works with the public speakers coming on after the officer presentation, and a lot of the time they will reference what they've just heard from the officer. So I'd be reluctant to remove that right. But ultimately, public speaking is just that. It is coming into a council chamber and you, Mr. or Mrs. Bloggs, saying, my view on the planning application is X, Y, and Z. You should vote for it or vote against it for these reasons. So we rarely have that anonymous person. So I would struggle to see how speaking online and having everybody know that it's Martin Hutchings talking about this planning application and giving these views would be different to Martin Hutchings coming into a council chamber and giving exactly the same views that he would online.
Yeah, I mean, for some people, it might make them more comfortable, talking from their own home rather than in front of in a council chamber full of people, if you like. So
it's how you move it. For me, it's how you move people in and out of the meeting. Clearly, councillors and officers will be there from start to finish, but the people who come in for their 5 minutes and will play no more part themselves in the meeting, how we make sure they're removed from the participatory element but can still view it as a member of the public afterwards, that's going to be key for me.
Okay, right, well, we've been going for over half an hour, I think, which is brilliant. it's been fascinating listening to both of you. Is there anything that we've not touched on? Any sort of final thing you'd like to say before we wrap it up and I say thanks?
Well, I've been encouraging all of our councillors of both parties to make sure they are up to speed on the IT. We've got training in place, and I've been making sure they are aware of every bit of training available. I think I'll end by repeating what I said a little bit earlier on, that I want the meeting to concentrate on planning issues, not why didn't we think of that at the preparation stage. So the preparation is absolutely key for me.
Thank you, Bill. Peter, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, I just see, you know, I'm always trying to have a glass half full approach to life, and I think what's come out of this, as with lots of things in both the planning field and also the building control field that I also manage, is that we've discovered new ways of working, and there's been a leap in advances in technology, which is if you can take a positive out of such a horrendous state that we're in at the moment, so we a month ago would have thought, well, planning committee, virtual planning committee. No, we couldn't possibly do that. Now we're saying, yes, we can do it, and this is how we're going to do it. I don't think we're going to be going to virtual planning committees when we end the lockdown, but there's going to be some really positive things, I know, that we are going to learn from this, as with everything to do with COVID-19, which we can take forward to provide a better service.
Well, that's a good point to end on. So just leaves me to say thank you, Peter. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
See you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.